Hello, I'm Jason Walters, and welcome to the IPR Game Room. Today, we're going to talk about Mark Hobbs' excellent game, Epitaph. Now, Epitaph is published by Less Than Three Games, who published a pretty wide number of interesting narrativist role-playing games. I got interested in reading it because I'm working on a project of my own right now called Spirit Box, and though it doesn't really resemble Epitaph very much, there was some mechanics in here I was interested in exploring for my own game to see how they worked. I'm pleased to say quite well looking at them. Mark Hobbs has done an excellent job on this book of accomplishing what he set out to do. And what he set out to do is to create a role-playing game device that explores the life of a person that you create who is deceased. And this takes place in a series of steps that are guided by role-playing and storytelling. To start with, you decide whether or not you wish to play a modern historical or fantasy setting for the person. Then you craft a palette for them. And the palette, you decide whether they are, in the palette you decide what is and is not in the story. Now, that's an important thing. For example, there's a character in the sample characters here that would have fought in World War I, but they decided to not include descriptions of the violence of World War I in the game itself. So you decide what's not going to be in the story. Then you describe the setting, because simply saying something's historical or modern is not good enough. You might want to say modern in Chicago in the 1990s. You might want to say historical in ancient Rome, you know. Finally, you describe who the departed is, their name, what their primary desire was, and what the goal of the game is as far as describing this person goes. So, for example, there's a sample character whose goal was to compile over their life a book of family recipes. So that would be your goal to help guide overall your storytelling. You then begin a timeline, which details sort of how they died, when they were born, and when they died. And interestingly, the timeline isn't depicted in Epitaph as a line, but as a circle, which is kind of pleasing aesthetically, that you fill in by, well, for three methods, but you fill in physically by making little notes along the circle, which sort of begins at birth and ends at death. You have three different scenes that you perform in rounds as a group to flesh out the life of the person in Epitaph. The first is a snapshot, which is literally a person describing sort of like a holographic picture of a scene from the person's life and others commenting and expanding upon it. The second is a scene, which you role play out together involving the person and or characters from their life. And finally, there's a remembrance, which is a monologue that the various players, well, they take the place of characters from within the person's life, and then give a monologue about them, describing them. And in these three ways, you flesh out the life of the character who has lived and died in Epitaph. Finally, at the end of the game, a player provides a eulogy to wrap it all up. I think it's a really, really interesting experiment. Again, I highly recommend that you get it. It also contains a final third chapter that describes how to play it online, how to best do it in a fantasy setting, how to do solo play, how to do duo play. It gives a very interesting brief essay about the origins of this game, which it took Mark about a decade to write, because it began, as these things often do, as a completely different game that he then later became Epitaph. It has an entire fairly lengthy and interesting advice section at the very end, which is highly valuable. Check it out. It's available in physical and electronic form through Indie Press Revolution. And follow us on the social medias, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and of course, subscribe to our YouTube channel. And remember, gamers, don't speak ill of the dead, even the imaginary dead.